Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Tuesday the 5th of October and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson and today I'm hosting the programme from Edinburgh while our studios in Cowcaddens are upgraded. First, we will have a look at today's coronavirus updates, then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then we will look at the stories behind today's news headlines together. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 3,221,448 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 2,644,166 have been confirmed negative, and 577,282 have tested positive. There are 2,056 new cases of COVID confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. I'm afraid to say that there are 21 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by coronavirus now stands at 8,687. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 998 were in hospital last night, 65 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,223,719 people had received their first dose of the COVID vaccination, and 3,849,656 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 137,152 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, and that is an increase of 166 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. As it's Tuesday, we have an update from the Office for National Statistics as well. In the week ending the 25th of September 2021, the COVID-19 infection rate in England increased to 1.21%. The hospital admission rate decreased to 5.26 per 100,000 people in the week ending the 26th of September. The number of deaths involving COVID-19 registered in England increased to 799 in the week ending 24th September, compared with 783 the previous week ending 17th September. The number of deaths from all causes in the UK in the week ending 24th September 2021 was 12,247, and that is 16% above the average for the corresponding week in the period between 2015 and 2019. Deaths were above the 5-year average in each of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Of all the deaths registered in the week to the 24th of September, 1,108 involved coronavirus, and that's 59 more than the previous week. It's the highest number since the week ending the 12th of March 2021. Deaths involving COVID-19 accounted for around 1 in 11 deaths. And these UK total deaths include non-residents. Now, we're lucky enough to be joined this evening by a regular contributor, Richard Thomson, who's been the SNP MP for Gordon since the 2019 general election. Prior to his election, Richard served on and led Aberdeenshire Council, and before that he was a reporter. Richard, thank you so much for joining us this evening. How are you doing?
Not bad, Andrew. Pleasure to be with you again.
Well, we're very grateful to you for joining us this evening. Our first story this evening is that Priti Patel has announced an inquiry into systemic failures in the Metropolitan Police that allowed a serving police officer to abuse his position to kidnap, rape and murder Sarah Everard. The inquiry will investigate why Wayne Couzens had not been identified by the force as a sexually aggressive predator. He was known among former colleagues as the rapist, and he had exposed himself on 2 occasions. Addressing the Conservative Party conference, the Home Secretary said that the killing exposed unimaginable failures in policing. She is yet to announce who will lead the non-statutory inquiry. The decision represents a change of direction for the government and will increase pressure on Dame Cressida Dick, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. The culture of the Met has been under scrutiny since it emerged that Couzens was known by colleagues to have a history of sexual aggression towards women. He was known as the rapist while working at the Civil Nuclear Constabulary in Kent by colleagues who also knew he liked rape pornography. questions have been raised about the Met's vetting processes after it emerged that Cousins was allowed to continue serving despite having been investigated by Kent Police in 2015 for indecent exposure. The first part of the inquiry will examine Cousins' previous behaviour and establish a definitive account of his conduct leading up to his conviction, as well as any opportunities missed, drawing on the ongoing Independent Office for Police Conduct investigations, a Home Office statement said. The second part will look at specific issues raised by the first part, which could include vetting practices, professional standards and discipline, and workplace behaviour. Last week it was revealed that 5 serving officers, including 3 from the Met, were under investigation for sharing racist and misogynistic messages with Cousins on a WhatsApp group. So, Richard, I'm reminded of the report by Sir William Macpherson into the events surrounding the botched investigations into the murder of Stephen Lawrence. Macpherson's finding that the Met was institutionally racist was groundbreaking and a very significant moment in reforming criminal justice system in England. Do you think there's a chance that this inquiry will be as successful in identifying the problems in the misogynistic culture inside the Met? When I say misogynistic, I'm thinking here of the recent discovery that more than half of the Met officers found guilty of sexual misconduct over the 4 years to 2020 kept their jobs, a total of 43 officers out of 83.
Well, Andrew, I certainly hope it does get to the bottom of what is clearly wrong, and in the culture of the Metropolitan Police Force. I mean, we're all horrified by the murder of Sarah, but the detail that has emerged in the trial has been absolutely sickening in terms of this was an individual who was trusted and who we should have been able to trust to carry out their duties, and he completely misused his power and the authority that he was assumed to have. And the conduct was just absolute. The murder was horrific enough, and the pain that Sarah's family must still be going through is unimaginable. And I think I'm not one for giving Priti Patel a great deal of credit, but I think she had no choice but to go down this route. I don't believe that there's only 1 or 2 bad apples, but in any organisation with any significant number of people, you are going to find people who are unsuited for that work. And particularly when it's an organisation like a police force, you'll often find that the people who are most unsuited are often, in some cases, most attracted to that because of the power and the authority that they think it will give them, and the opportunity to perpetrate further harms, and they think it may make them untouchable. Now, I think that it's imperative that we have policing that we can trust, and I think that one of the ways to rebuild trust is to have a no-holds-barred inquiry into how Wayne Cousins and others may have slipped through the net. Now, I should say I don't subscribe to the view that attackers like him are monsters and it's isolated. I think we need to make sure that those who are being entrusted with the responsibilities of police officers and anyone else in any kind of position of responsibility and authority is fully vetted to the best of the ability of the organisation that's vetting them, that those standards of vetting are as high as they ever possibly can be. But also what's particularly shocking about this is the information that's come out after the fact about not just his nickname, but the investigations into the conduct. And you really have to wonder why alarm bells, if they were ringing at that time, weren't heeded. Now, I don't wish to speculate upon that, but I think it's important that the inquiry does this because it looks into that and also looks for any wider lessons that can be learned, because there's the issue of trust, first and foremost, in individuals who hold the rank of a police officer, but trust in policing more generally. But then there's also the culture, and what culture is it that is being allowed and perhaps has been tolerated for too long that enabled somebody like Cousins to achieve the levels of access and authority and power and position that he did. So the inquiry needs to start looking at that, and I really, really hope it doesn't try to just scapegoat 1 or 2 individuals that have been found out in this trawl. Clearly there is a cultural issue. That's the noise that's coming loud and clear from this, and this needs to address that in a frank and fearless manner, and I hope that's exactly what it does, and that other police forces learn the lessons from that, not just the Metropolitan Police.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. I think this evening we'll be talking about cultural issues relating to criminal conduct a few times. But thank you for talking to us about this particular case. Our next story this evening is that Boris Johnson has insisted that there is no crisis in supply chains, but admitted just 127 visas for tanker drivers had been granted. Asked by BBC Radio 4's Today programme if he believed there was a crisis, the Prime Minister said no, and said difficulties were linked to the revival of the economy, calling it a giant waking up. Johnson said the government had asked the road haulage industry to provide the names of foreign drivers who would want to come to the UK, but only 127 had been produced so far. The Prime Minister claimed that this was evidence of a global shortage. The Prime Minister also insisted that a difficult winter of the petrol crisis, shortages on supermarket shelves, and soaring energy bills were symptoms of the economic path the country was on that would tackle a long-term lack of productivity, low wages, and underinvestment in energy and infrastructure. Mr Johnson doubled down on his insistence that disruption would be temporary, but said it was part of the transition to offering more people better pay and conditions, saying that drivers had often had to urinate in bushes because the workforce was not valued by the industry. So, Richard, Johnson's insistence that the country is not facing a crisis will inevitably draw comparisons with the Labour Prime Minister Jim Callaghan and his claim in '78 that the winter of discontent that the rest of the world did not see, and that the rest of the world did not see mounting chaos in Britain. What odds would you give me now on there being a winter of discontent this year?
Oh, crisis? What crisis? I think you're referring to there, Andrew. I would. I wouldn't give you any odds at all because it's a racing cert that that's exactly what we're heading for, and that's what I've described it as myself. There's just a congealing of negative factors, whether it's a shortage of goods, whether it's rising fuel prices, whether it's removal of demand from the economy with the decimation of household incomes, with the removal of universal credit, whether it's the looming impact of the removal of the triple lock on pensions and the upcoming hike on national insurance contributions, which are going to hit the lowest earners the hardest. As I say, there's a congealing of factors here that are all coming together to lead us to that Tory winter of discontent. But I'm absolutely shocked, appalled and disgusted at the comments of the Prime Minister here. The idea, we know he likes to move fast and break things, as Dominic Cummings used to put it. But quite frankly, this is just ideological nonsense, and it could only fall from the lips of somebody who doesn't feel that he's ever going to personally bear the economic consequences of that. That this is not the creative destruction of capitalist fantasy. This is quite simply the whole pack of cards of Brexit collapsing in on top of us, because however bad any of these individual factors would be on their own, they are being exacerbated and amplified by the self-inflicted harm that is Brexit. I mean, let's go back to lorry drivers. There is no global shortage. I mean, most countries in Western Europe have fewer drivers than they would like, but nevertheless, other countries in Europe are not experiencing the shortages and the breakages in the supply chain that are here. And it's not surprising. I mean, UK hauliers tend to serve the UK market, but so much of our goods were being moved, or that we imported into the UK, or that were being moved around the UK, were being done through cabotage by foreign drivers. And when European drivers understandably don't want to come here because of the poor working conditions and the perceived hostility around Brexit, you can't really blame those shortages on anything else. But to say that this is just part of the creative destruction process of an economy reorientating itself to become more productive, I'm afraid that's just 24-carat copper-bottomed ocean-going chateau-bottled nonsense. And the Prime Minister knows it. And I think it's just a sign of how arrogant and out of touch he is. He thinks he can even get away with such a claim for a moment.
Thanks, Richard. And I'm struck by your use of the word congealing there, especially after I saw the Prime Minister being described this week as a fat burg of obfuscation and mendacity. So congealing's probably about the right word. We'll move on to the next story, though. And that is that the EU could hit Britain and Jersey's energy supply over the UK's failure to provide sufficient fishing licences to French fishermen, France's EU Affairs Minister has said. Clement Beaune, who is a close ally of the French President Emmanuel Macron, said action would be decided on within days and discussions were already in motion. France has been pushing the EU to take a stronger stance against the UK over its concerns that Boris Johnson's government is acting in breach of its obligations over fishing access to Channel waters. Last week, a third of French boats applying to fish in Jersey's waters were turned down by the island's government. The previous week, the UK government provided only 12 of 47 French vessels with permits for its coastal waters. The UK and the Jersey authorities have said the vessels that have been turned down had failed to provide evidence of operating in the relevant waters. Bowen said that France would not stand for it. He said, "Enough already. We have an agreement negotiated by France, by Michel Barnier, and it should be applied 100%. It isn't being. In the next few days, we will take measures at the European level or nationally to apply pressure on the United Kingdom." He added, "We defend our interests, we do it nicely and diplomatically, but when that doesn't work, we take measures. The Channel Islands, the UK are dependent on us for their energy supply. They think they can live on their own and badmouth Europe as well. And because it doesn't work, they indulge in one-upmanship and in an aggressive way." The UK is a net importer of energy from French nuclear power stations. Paris has previously suggested it could cut the supply to Jersey, whose energy it provides through undersea cables, under a commercial contract between the French company EDF and the Jersey Electricity Company. Firstly, Richard, we looked at this a few days ago in Scotland at 7. Do you think this latest statement today, is this simply more sabre rattling, or is this developing into something more serious?
Well, it's certainly serious, but just because the French authorities can take this action doesn't mean that they should. And I really don't think it's fair to be penalising the Channel Islanders for the for the actions of the UK government in this way. I don't think this is a reasonable or proportionate response to that. And quite frankly, I think their interests would be better served by piping down on this and addressing it in the proper forums through the European Union and or bilaterally in other ways. But I think it is symptomatic, unless anyone thinks I'm going soft in the UK government here, it is symptomatic of a government that that thought it had all the sovereignty in the world, and then was suddenly surprised to find out that other countries also have sovereignty, particularly those European countries that were supposedly under the thumb of Brussels, and that those European countries are also willing to use their sovereignty in ways that they think are beneficial to them, even if it's harmful to the UK. And I think the howls of outrage that we've seen, whether it's over this or whether it's over the relations around that led up to the signing, the agreement in the Northern Ireland Protocol, it's been really quite illuminating to see how little all these little England or Brexiteers had actually thought about how other countries also had sovereignty and how they might be able to use it. So I think I'm put in mind of the statement of a former Danish finance minister who said that there were two kinds of European nations. They're small nations, and there are those that have yet to realise that they are small nations. I think we're going through that, kind of like the storming, destructive piece that you were talking about earlier in terms of Boris Johnson and the economy. Maybe we're going through with some of the tantrums and toys being flung out of the pram that we're seeing at the moment from the UK government. We're beginning to see some of that storming and destructive behaviour that's eventually going to lead them to the realisation that they too are a small country, that we're interdependent with one another, and that you can either have a de jure outcome that's negotiated in good faith and adhered to by all parties, or you'll get a de facto outcome that may not actually be to your liking, because we do not have all the cards as in the way that the Prime Minister once was proud to try and tell us that we had.
Well, that's a good point that you make, Richard. I was thinking myself about the statements this week from Lord Frost at the Tory conference, saying, basically now denouncing the Northern Ireland Protocol that was his protocol that he negotiated and signed. We're seeing disputes now opening up on fishing with energy supply. Why do you think that a belligerent Johnson cabinet is so determined to insult and antagonise the EU and its member states? As you suggest, is it simply a case of the terrible twos?
Oh, quite possibly, but I think so much of this is for domestic UK consumption. But what they forget is that European leaders and decision makers can watch UK television and radio and read their newspapers, and they know exactly what's being said. So I think the discussions are probably rather more polite and contrite around the negotiating table whenever the seats around the negotiating table are occupied. But so much of this is just for the Daily Mail rabble rousing element there. But yeah, I think that at some point a grown up has to re-enter the room, and as I say, you can either have a de jure negotiated outcome or a de facto one imposed upon you. And quite simply, when you look at the power relationships around Europe, the power is not with the United Kingdom.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that people who have suffered the most as a result of the pandemic will be at the heart of Scotland's COVID recovery strategy. For a Fairer Future sets out the next steps in Scotland's recovery from the pandemic, recognising that while the pandemic has affected every area of life in Scotland, those who were already struggling have been hardest hit by its effects. The strategy aims to address systemic inequalities made worse by COVID, improve people's well-being, and remobilise public services to be more focused on people's needs, building on lessons learned during the pandemic. Actions to achieve this will include upskilling and retraining opportunities for workers impacted by the pandemic and transition to net zero, help for low-income families most at risk of poverty, and locally based mental health and well-being support for children and young people. While the strategy is focused over the next 18 months, it includes a series of actions over the course of this Parliament to deliver substantial improvements in child poverty, make significant progress towards net zero, and secure an economic recovery that is fair and green. The Deputy First Minister and COVID Recovery Secretary John Swinney said, "The impacts of this pandemic have not been felt evenly, with the most disadvantaged suffering disproportionately from the virus, and the social and economic effects of lockdown restrictions. For that reason, our recovery must go further than how life was before COVID. This strategy sets out how we will do that, working with local government, the third sector, and businesses large and small. It is the product of months of engagement with a variety of individuals and organisations representing sectors across the country, including the Citizens' Assembly and the Social Renewal Advisory Board. By working together with the same energy, imagination, and urgency as we approach the pandemic, we can drive a recovery that delivers more for all of Scotland." So, Richard, first of all, do you think that many people have any reserves of energy, imagination, or urgency left after 561 days of living with the pandemic?
Well, it's certainly been a grueling time, but yes, I think there is still that desire to get back to some kind of normal and to make that normal better. And I think this package goes some way to helping that in terms of our health and social care system that can happen. And we're talking here about a package that's designed to recruit 1,000 additional NHS staff to support multidisciplinary working, as it's been termed. Also, investing heavily in some of the step-down care, which will help get people out of hospitals in the acute setting into more appropriate care settings and being able to return to some degree of enablement at home. In terms of that, it's going to involve investing up to, I think, about £48 million to increase the hourly rate of social care staff, helping to support primary care, which has come under a great deal of pressure. And it's also looking at attracting more nurses. So in terms of bringing in the skills to help relieve some of the pressures there, as well as to help overcome some of the organisational difficulties that there sometimes are, particularly around about step-down care and in terms of supporting the acute sector. I think that there's a great deal in this that is it's maybe not particularly headline grabbing apart from the figure, but it is certainly very practical and I think necessary and hopefully very, very welcome too, so that we can start to get back to a health and social care sector that isn't operating in crisis mode as it has been over the last year and a half through necessity, and it can get back to some kind of semblance of providing the all-round care that we would hope to see and expect.
Thanks, Richard. You're quick out the blocks this evening because we were just about to start talking about the £300 million new winter investment for health and care in detail. So let's carry on that conversation now. A substantial new investment, as I say, of over £300 million in hospital and community care has been unveiled to help tackle what is anticipated to be the toughest winter the NHS and social care system has ever faced. The new multi-year funding will support a range of measures to maximise capacity in our hospitals and primary care, reduce delayed discharges, improve pay for social care staff, and ensure those in the community who need support receive effective and responsive care. The NHS and Care Winter Package of additional funding includes recruiting 1,000 additional NHS staff to support multidisciplinary working, as Richard just said. £40 million for step-down care to enable hospital patients to temporarily enter care homes or receive additional care at home with no financial liability to the individual or their family towards the cost of the care home. Over £60 million to maximise the capacity of care at home services. Up to £48 million will be made available to increase the hourly rate of social care staff to match new NHS Band 2 staff. £20 million to enhance multidisciplinary teams, enable more social work assessments to be carried out, and support joint working between health and social care. £28 million of additional funding to support primary care. £4.5 million available to health boards to attract at least 200 registered nurses from out with Scotland by March 2022, and £4 million to help staff with their practical and emotional needs, including pastoral care and other measures to aid rest and recuperation. So, Richard, a couple of aspects in that long list caught my attention. You've already mentioned the £40 million step down care, which struck me as evidence, perhaps, that the wishes and the feedback from clinicians was being listened to. But we'll look at another couple of these things. As you said, there's £4.5 million available to health boards to attract at least 200 nurses from out with Scotland. So do you think, does this mean nurses from England, Wales and Northern Ireland, or does it mean from further afield? And how would that work with Priti Patel in the Home Office doggedly refusing to allow all sorts of workers from overseas to come to work in the UK?
Well, I don't think anyone could deny that there is a shortage of healthcare professionals. So I would hope that certainly wouldn't be nurses wouldn't be a category of worker that would be caught up in that. But at the same time, it's important that we continue to attract people into the nursing profession domestically through the Scottish Government has certainly put itself at the head of that, ahead of England, Wales and Northern Ireland by offering a substantial bursary for nurses. So I think it's important that we make sure we have the right people doing that job. And I think that while I would very much hope that this could pass through, it does help to make the argument, does it not, that we have to, as a country, we're often looking overseas for skills. However hard we work and however much domestic talent that we nurture to bring through. Our problem in Scotland isn't having too many people, it's not having enough people, and it's important that we make sure that we have that freedom of movement restored as soon as we can to make sure that we're attracting the right people to do the jobs that we need here and rewarding them appropriately and treating them well while they are here. But I do realise I skipped slightly ahead there, talking about some of this £300 million package. But I think part of the wider picture in terms of the COVID recovery, because there were two announcements around this with the health and social care package that we're talking about now, but also a wider COVID recovery. I think it's imperative on the Scottish Government to use the powers it has to the best of its abilities to be and immigration clearly isn't one of those powers. But to use the powers that it does have to try and make sure that the recovery that we do build back is one which is bringing prosperity to all of society, that is enabling previously marginalised groups to play the best part that they can in that recovery, to make sure that our recovery is sustainable environmentally as well as socially, and making sure that we're spreading opportunity around, because it's a cliche to talk about building back better almost now, but that's absolutely what we have to do, because in the old Scottish economy, no matter what self-conceit we had of ourselves in that, too many people's talents were still being wasted by the pressures that the way we ordered our society placed upon them. And by doing things like making sure that, I think the 1,140 hours of childcare is a game changer for us in that regard, in terms of releasing the talent and releasing the opportunity and releasing the potential that the people of Scotland have. We have to try and make sure that we do use those powers that are directly under our control to build the best Scotland that we can, not just for its own sake, but also as a platform to show what we could do if we had all the powers of an independent country. And to think, if this is a difference we can make with the powers that we have, just think what we could do if we were in charge of all tax, of all welfare, of all incentives in the economy, and also in terms of immigration and who we allow to come and who we encourage to come and live amongst us and contribute to wider Scottish society.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard. And in fact, we've got a third COVID recovery plan story this evening as well. And that is that plans to help Scotland's education system continue to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic have been published by the Scottish Government. Created with input from across the sector, including young people, the Education Recovery Strategy outlines how almost £500 million has been used to support learners and staff across the country. The publication also sets out how the Scottish Government will continue to provide ongoing support to the sector. This includes further support for learners who are sitting exams in 2022, access to in-school mental health and wellbeing support that young people need, including counselling services, recruiting 3,500 additional teachers and 500 support staff over this parliamentary term, expanding funded early learning and childcare for children aged 1 and 2, starting with low-income households, and committing £1 billion to tackle the poverty-related attainment gap and support education recovery. So, Richard, this recovery plan published today has been attacked by the EIS, which says that it fails to promote a single big initiative which would catalyse an education recovery. Now, I don't know whether anyone in the EIS head office has actually met any teachers before, but all the teachers who I know are committed to teaching and are committed to the young people who they teach, but to a man and woman, they hate big ideas and they hate big changes. So why is the EIS taking this line today, do you think? Is it simply a case of SNP bad?
I wouldn't say that, but I think that if there was one big galvanising idea that could lead to the kind of recovery that I would hope that we would all want, then I'd certainly be very willing to sit down with the EIS to hear it. But I've had a fairly long career in the public sector and the private sector, and I've grown increasingly suspicious of not the big vision. That's important, but most of the improvement that you ever achieve in any organisation or any system, it's seldom a big bang change. It's the incremental stage by stage improvement, just like it is with in any aspect of life. It's the small incremental improvements, it's stage by stage that bring this about. So I'm welcome this because, as you said at the top of the item, it's involved children in this. It's going to provide support for those who are set to be taking exams in 2022. It's looking at the mental health impact, and there has been an obvious mental health impact over the lockdown, but that sits on top of that which was already there. And I think there will be effects of the pandemic and the way we were forced to change the lives that we lead, and that is going to be playing out for some considerable time to come. So all of these things, including the recruitment of additional teacher support and additional teachers, I think are all very important components in helping to relieve the pressures on a system that has stood up remarkably to the pressures and the demands that were placed on it through the pandemic, and which can start to bring us back to a recovery situation and help to ensure that this super resilient cohort of students in our schools are able to continue through their school careers and enter further education, higher education, the world of work and adulthood as best equipped as they can be in light of all that they've gone through, and to help to make sure that we have a resilient, high-achieving education system for the future. But as I say, if there is a big idea out there that everybody is missing in this, I would love to hear what it is, so that we can give it the consideration that it merits.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard. We'll move on now to our next story, and that is that more than 40 small TV and film production companies behind shows such as Derry Girls and Say Yes to the Dress have come together to warn that the government's proposed privatisation of Channel 4 could put them out of business. The 44 companies from across Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and Yorkshire have taken out a full-page advertisement in today's Daily Telegraph, timed to hit readers during the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. The ad, placed in what is traditionally seen as the Tories' house newspaper, argues that selling Channel 4, which is state-owned but commercially funded through TV ad revenue and is not required to turn a profit, would be the antithesis of the government's pledge to level up businesses and communities across the country. It would cost jobs, reduce investment, and place companies at risk in the nations and regions, the ad states, from production companies who should know. Firms that have co-signed the deal who co-signed the ad include Hat-Trick, the maker of the hit comedy Derry Girls, and True North, the indie behind shows such as Say Yes to the Dress Lancashire. A report by Ampere Analysis found that over the past 2 years, Channel 4 worked with more than 200 small production companies, more than any other broadcaster, with 140 of those relying on it for half or more of all of their TV work. The report argued that a new owner would make deep cuts to Channel 4's programming to make it more profitable, which could put up to 60 small production companies at risk of going out of business. So, Richard, firstly, Channel 4, as I say, is publicly owned. Does this plan to sell Channel 4 show just how little the Tories have changed since Thatcher? I'm wondering, is this plan, is it a howl from the ninth ring of hell, where I'm pretty sure she's resident now, demanding that what little of the family silver that is left should be flogged off?
Well, the great irony here, Andrew, is that Channel 4 was set up under Thatcher, and there are precious few things that you can take as a success from her reign, but Channel 4 would surely have to be one of them. And, I take my hat off to the Tories for setting it up as a public sector model with a public service obligation. They allowed advertising so it could exist in commercial revenues, and it initially had that challenging remit of making programmes and catering for minorities that were not being well served by the other three terrestrial channels at the time. And I think over the course of Channel 4's life, you would have to say that it's done that remarkably well. It's a tremendous success story. It's annoyed all the right people along the way, including the Tories that set it up. And this is just... I do not understand why. Well, I do understand. I think there's an opportunity to carve up a dripping roast and make a buck along the way. But what the Tories did with it was very good. And Wales got its television channel resolving with Espeborec, the Welsh version of Channel 4, which resolved a long running grievance there. That this is actually a success story of the 1980s, and why the Conservatives would want to turn Channel 4 into just any other broadcaster. Really, it's an act of vandalism culturally. I'm reminded a few years ago, Stuart Cosgrove, Will Kent face around these parts in Scottish broadcasting, obviously earns a dime from Channel 4 as well, or at least used to. He made a really salient point a few years ago that if Channel 4 hadn't been given its obligation to make more programmes in the regions and nations, as we're supposed to call them, it's doubtful that a series like Shameless, set in Manchester, would ever have been made. So Channel 4 has done a remarkable job over that time of reflecting different voices, different lifestyles back to give a far better reflection of the people it broadcasts to than any other commercial broadcaster over that time has managed. And I think that the real danger here is, as soon as you privatise it, you bring in the profit motive. As soon as you bring in the profit motive, you look to squeeze costs because you think you'll get the same number of viewers and therefore you'll be able to charge the same amount for your advertising. But at a stroke, you'll change the one thing that makes Channel 4 different from any other broad there. It was Roy Thomson, and he, the Canadian magnate, when he took over the franchise for Central Scotland's independent television that became STV. He said it was the bits in between the programmes that he was interested in. Just the adverts. That was what made the money. But it's the viewers aren't interested in the adverts. They're interested in the bits in between the adverts in terms of the content. And as soon as you make Channel 4 just another commercial broadcaster, it will make somebody sufficient money. It will make some shareholders sufficient money. Of that, I've no doubt, because it's a well-established brand. But you're going to diminish the cultural impact it has. You're going to diminish the significance of the programs it makes. It's going to fail to continue. It will begin to fail to serve those minority interest groups that it was set up to reflect back. And worst of all, you're going to see a shrivelling of that. I've absolutely no doubt, of all those small independent companies that have grown up around providing content and getting access to that kind of significant broadcaster that they've been able to get through the model that Channel 4 operates. So it will lead to a further metropolitanisation of broadcasting and a commercialisation of it, and everybody is going to end up culturally the poorer from it. And I just wish that some of the Tories that think that, privatisation good, state ownership bad, go back and have a look at the origins of Channel 4 and who actually set it up, and then reflect on whether or not over the 40 years it's been in existence it's fulfilled its remit. Because I think that by and large it's done that, and that's in no small measure due to the corporate structure and the mission it was given at the outset.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that the French Catholic Church has expressed shame and pleaded for forgiveness after a devastating report found that at least 330,000 children were victims of sexual abuse by clergy and lay members of the church institutions over the past 70 years. The publication of a landmark report released today, France's first major reckoning with what the Catholic Church accepted was appalling abuse, has shaken the country with its horrific findings of a massive phenomenon of sexual abuses of children operating for decades within the Church and its associated institutions. The 2.5-year independent inquiry found that staggering numbers of children were subjected to sexual violence by priests and clergy, while the crimes were covered up in a systemic way by a deliberate veil of silence in the Church. The president of the investigative committee, Jean-Marc Sauvé, told a press conference, until the early 2000s, the Catholic Church showed a profound and even cruel indifference towards the victims. The report found an estimated 216,000 children were victims of sexual violence by French Catholic priests, deacons and other clergy from 1950 until 2020. When lay members of the Church, such as teachers and catechism supervisors, were included, the figure rose to at least 330,000 children sexually abused over 70 years. The report said the vast majority of victims were boys who came from a wide variety of social backgrounds and who were attacked at a young age before reaching adolescence. Some sex offenders inside the Church were predators on a vast scale who targeted extremely high numbers of children over long periods, with some attacking more than 150 victims. Sauvé said the numbers of victims were damning and in no way can remain without a response. He urged the Church to pay reparations, even though most cases are well beyond the statute of limitations for prosecution. He recommended the Catholic Church overhaul its internal legal system, reform its governments, rethink training, and look at the dynamics that allowed the abuse to take place, namely the overwhelming power of priests and the identification of a priest to Christ. The report made a minimum estimate of between 2,900 and 3,200 sexual abusers of children who operated in the French Catholic Church since 1950, yet it said only a handful of cases had prompted disciplinary action under canonical law, let alone criminal prosecution. So, Richard, I've got two questions for you in connection with this appalling story. Firstly, one directed at the story itself, and then a second one more generally. So with regard to the story, François Devaux, who set up the Victims Association Le Parole Libérée, told church representatives at the presentation today, "You must pay for all these crimes. You are a disgrace to our humanity. In this hell there have been abominable mass crimes, but there has been even worse, betrayal of trust, betrayal of morale, betrayal of children." He accused the Church of cowardice and condemned a deviant system, saying that what was needed was a comprehensive response under a new Vatican III Council led by Pope Francis. Do you think that there's a chance that a Vatican III Council will be established by the Pope?
I honestly don't know, Andrew, and I'm not familiar with the workings of the Vatican to be able to venture an informed opinion on whether that something on that scale could happen. But I think you're absolutely right in this. I mean, this is it's a sadly familiar tale, but such a shocking abuse of power and of trust amongst the vulnerable and the the innocent who were compelled to remain silent for fear of disappointing their priest, their parents, their God. It's just appalling. There's nothing that can be said in mitigation. And my heart goes out to those who were abused and who've suffered in silence for so long. But however the Catholic Church responds to it, it should respond the same as any institution should, and that is with a determination to allow the truth to be revealed, whatever that truth is and however uncomfortable that is, to apologise sincerely and to make the reparations that it can. It can't undo the harm, but it can begin to repair it, as I say, by letting that truth emerge, whatever that truth is, and however inconvenient that may be for some who could still suffer from the consequences of that truth being revealed. And then, even at this late stage, by allowing for reparations and for help and comfort to be offered to those who, as I say, have suffered in silence around this for so long, or who in many cases have also spent a long time fighting for their stories to be heard and to be believed. And that is the only way, I think, these are the only principles I think can be brought to bear here, is for truth, for reconciliation, for justice, for retribution where that's appropriate, and for healing. And that is how any organisation should, I think, be setting about approaching it. And I think it's particularly appropriate that the Catholic Church should be trying to respond in that way.
Thanks, Richard. I was going to ask you a more general question as well. On the one hand, the committee's report describes this as a phenomenon that then goes on to call it systemic and deliberate, which sounds like the opposite of a phenomenon to me. It strikes me that abuse on this scale over this length of time sounds systemic and societal to me. So how massive are the necessary changes to society going to have to be to bring this cruel indifference towards young people and their lives to an end? And that applies, there are investigations in Ireland, in England, in Scotland, in Germany, and in the United States. So it's not a societal issue for France alone. But how massive are these changes going to have to be?
Well, I would like to think, and I hope this doesn't come across as complacent, but I would like to think that culturally we're in a different place to how we were in the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, even the 80s. In recent years, we've made more of a point of talking about children's rights and understanding what those are and helping children to understand their rights. And while that doesn't make it any easier to speak out, for a child that would while that doesn't make it any easier or easy to speak out, I would hope that more children and young people are aware of their rights. And I've stumbled over my words quite a bit there, but hopefully it would give them the confidence to know when something is not right. Also, we're teaching children about sex and relationships in an age appropriate way. And I would like to think that we are better equipping children to know when adults are behaving in a way that is inappropriate, and more importantly, to know who they can go to, a trusted figure who can, even if it is a family member or whoever it is that is injuring them in that way, that they know that there are places where they can go, where they can say what is happening, and where importantly they will be believed, and where the appropriate action can be taken thereafter. So I don't deny that there are huge cultural shifts have needed to happen, are underway, may not have completely happened, because wherever there is power, there is an opportunity for abuse. But I think we're more aware of it now. We're less inclined to shrug off the inappropriate behaviour of adults as being essentially harmless and ignoring what might be going on behind it. We have that better awareness as adults. Hopefully we're equipping children with an awareness of what is and isn't appropriate, and that coming together, that creates an environment where safeguarding is taken more seriously, where the problem is taken more seriously, and where, as I say, it is in the first instance less likely to happen, but that where it does, people are better able to come forward and tell their truth, and for the perpetrators to be caught. As I say, I hope that doesn't come across as complacent, but certainly I think that cultural change has been underway for a while, and I would hope that many, many more children are now safer as a result of that openness and improved awareness.
Thanks, Richard. And we'll move on now to another story, and that is that a deal to purchase a ferry for deployment on the Clyde and Hebrides network has been agreed, bringing additional resilience to the fleet. The MV Utne was built in 2014 and is a roll-on roll-off passenger ship which will accommodate 195 passengers and 34 cars. The Utne has been earmarked for the Oban to Craigmuir route, and communities in Skye and the Western Isles will also benefit as a result of the cascade of vessels elsewhere on the network. The Minister for Transport, Graham Day, said, "I'm very pleased to announce that the Utne has been purchased by CMAL to join the ferry fleet serving the Clyde and Hebrides network. We have always said we would look to the second-hand market for additional vessels to support our island communities, and this purchase is the result of this ongoing work." The Scottish Government has committed £580 million to fund new ferries and port investments over the next 5 years. It has pledged to continue to work with CMAL and CalMac to develop programmes that will deliver additional improvements to the network. So, Richard, first of all, the Utna is going to have to be modified before she enters service with CalMac. And given that the well-publicised recent problems with both constructing and maintaining ferries in Scotland, what do you think the chances are that this modification work will be completed on time and on budget?
Well, I very much hope it will be. And I think it's an important strengthening of the fleet. As you say, there's been well publicised issues round about the construction of the two ferries at Ferguson's. We know that we have a fleet that is ageing and that is being subject to technical failures. So I think the Scottish Government has identified the problem correctly, that there needs to be an improvement in terms of the physical infrastructure that supports the CalMac ferry network, and also an improvement in the quality of the fleet. And while I would much rather that we were building ferries that were on time and on budget and entering service as planned to meet needs that have been identified, where that can't happen, because obviously even when things go right, there's a big lead-in time, it's right that we seek that capacity elsewhere. So I don't know much about this ferry, but it's a relatively young ferry by the sounds of it. If it was commissioned in 2014, it's right that it would take time to make sure that it is fit for the purpose for which it's going to be put in terms of any modifications. And let's hope that we're able to provide the ferry service that islanders deserve over the months and the years ahead, because there's been a great deal has been done that's good in terms of the road equivalent tariff, in terms of putting that in place to allow the islands to flourish. And I think that it's important at the back of that, however, that we have a ferry fleet and the infrastructure to support it that is fit for the century that we're in. So this won't solve all the issues across CalMac, of that I've no doubt, but it'll have an important role to play in maintaining the resilience of the network. And I look forward
Absolutely.
to further acquisitions as required.
Well, yes, we'll talk about the further acquisitions in a moment, but and as you were saying, we know that more than half the CalMac fleet is now older than its planned life expectancy, but the Utne is being replaced in Norway by a new ferry which is powered by electricity. Should we not be commissioning Norwegian yards to construct new ferries like that for CalMac?
I'd rather we were doing it here in Scotland now, the difficulties at Ferguson's notwithstanding, and that will come out in the wash with the investigations about what's going on. But the Norwegians have been powering ahead with electrification of boats for some time. And I remember when I was involved through Aberdeenshire Council and the North Sea Commission, being staggered at the sheer ownership of boats, whether that was pleasure craft or well, particularly in pleasure craft, never mind commercially. And in terms of decarbonising the maritime sector, the Norwegians are streets ahead of us, particularly when it comes to application. There's particular applications on their coastal industries with fish farms, and you can it's possible to power vessels that are able to serve that market and then charge up overnight. So I've also travelled on an electrically powered ferry in the Netherlands, so that the principle is not new. They can power vessels of some quite considerable size, as well as the smaller vessels that you might expect. I wish we were building them here in Scotland, because there are a number of yards that I believe would be would be capable of doing so. But again, I think you see that some of the benefits that small European nations have been, with a full control of their industrial policy, have been able to take in terms of positioning themselves, and that just creates a culture of being go ahead in that market, whether it's in shipbuilding or whether it's in renewable energy or any other field of endeavour. And I just think that sometimes we're missing a trick in Scotland, and a part of, not all of it can be put down to governance, but I think at least part of it can be put down to governance and what our government in Scotland actually does and doesn't have control over. But certainly, could we and should we be building electric vessels that are competitive in the world stage as well as meeting our own demands? Absolutely. The question is, why aren't we?
Thanks, Richard. And that was our final news item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, and we would really like you to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland, and you will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. We're particularly looking for volunteers to assist us as we cover the COP26 conference in Glasgow. Meantime, we will be here again at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in then. I'd like to say thank you to everyone for joining us in Broadcasting Scotland, and of course, a very big thank you indeed to Richard for joining us this evening from Ellen. So that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening.